Welcome, everyone. This is AndresRestart. Welcome to episode 3 for Heated Debate, a series where I bring on a fellow content creator and we talk about a particular subject that we disagree on, and we do our best to have a really fun discussion, but with less restraint, make it a little bit heated. Maybe there'll be a few insults thrown in there. It's about having fun and just throwing out all our thoughts, and we'll see what happens. That's kind of the basic goal. And this time, I have my friend Cameron from Gamebird Classic. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on again. Looking forward to getting heated.
Yeah. And so, Cameron, I have by the way, his channel will be linked in the description below, but I have a request of you. I mean, I'm going to be requesting this of everyone every time I come into they come on. I ask that you do your best to make this episode more heated than the last one. Come at me. Hurt my feelings. You can't, but you can try, right? And I will try and do the same. We're going to try and have like a level-headed discussion, but there needs to be some heat. And so for those in the comments, please let us know if it was an appropriate amount of heat, if it was too much, if it needs more. We're going to try and do that. But we're going to stick to the 20-minute timer this time. And I'm going to click that in a moment. I haven't even brought up the topic yet, but the title of the video should tell you all you need to know. We're going to be talking about whether this name of Nintendo Switch 2 is dumb. Like, that's what we've been calling it. Some people think Switch 2 makes sense. Some people don't. I think it makes sense. Cameron doesn't. That's the sides we're taking. And so with that all said, Cameron, buddy, I love you. You're a good friend of mine, but I'm hitting that timer and the restraints are being dropped. So I think Switch 2 is a really good name for Nintendo's next generation console for a variety of reasons, but I know you don't. So tell me why Switch 2 is dumb as a name for a next gen console.
All right, I think Switch 2 is going to be if it is indeed the name of the console, which I do believe there is a possibility. We're looking at a new Nintendo. They're shaking things up. They're making movies and theme parks now. They got a new president. It's a possibility. I don't like it. I think it's a dumb idea. One example is there's really no precedent for this. Nintendo, with their naming conventions, has genuinely done something different. We went from the Nintendo Entertainment System to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System to the Nintendo 64. We also went from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance, the Wii to the Wii U. Nintendo has a very quirky personality. Is something that a lot of charm and zaniness, and I think that really makes Nintendo stand out. And I would hate to see that kind of fade away years going forward from this success. I don't want to see Switch become boring. It's the same naming conventions that Sony uses for their main platform, and to me, when I think of Nintendo, I think that Switch 2 is boring and uninspired, and I'd rather get something interesting or exciting just to start things off.
Sure. So you brought up Sony, and the reason why Sony does it is because it works.
Sure. It
works. Wii U did not work. It was a terrible idea. 3DS was okay. That was better. It had a number in it, right? It did suggest more than DS, 3DS. But I just think that Nintendo constantly makes the mistake of trying to be too wacky in the wrong places for the sake of just being wacky, not with actual purpose sometimes. And I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake. And if they were just clear cut, the messaging would be clear. People would get it. The same way people get what a PS2 is. People are going to get what a PS6 is. There's not going to be any debates. It's not going to be a Wii U situation. And because Nintendo doesn't adopt the strategy, or hasn't, they've always run the issue of kind of having to start from scratch again with the branding and making it clear to people what is this and what is that. So honestly, yes, there's a history, and I understand the history, and I think history is a good way to sort of read the future, to try and like predict it, but it's not the sole consideration. If that's the only thing we look at, well, I just think it's a bad idea.
Sure. Those are good points. And yes, the Wii U was a commercial flop, did not do well. I don't think the naming was the best for the Wii U, but I think there's a host of issues as to why that console did poorly. The console looked nearly identical. They only showed off the controller. They didn't show the system. So, I mean, I knew people for that first year who just thought it was an accessory. I don't think, just because I don't think Switch 2 should be called Switch 2, I think they could be creative. They could keep Switch in the name. They could call it the Switch Evolution. It's the next evolution in the Switch line. They could call it the Super Nintendo Switch, like a lot of people have joked about or mentioned. Or they could just call it something entirely different without the words the Switch.
Tell me a name that, so like, give me a name that it could be one you already mentioned that you think would actually be a good name. Like a good name. Because the ones you mentioned, I don't think are good names.
Okay. So I think it depends. Sure.
Go for it. Give me an example of one.
Okay. So before I do, I wanna say, like, a lot of people thought the Switch was not a very good name when that console came out. A lot of people thought the Wii was another weird.
I counter that by saying that's just, that's anecdotal, right? Like, how do you quantify a lot of people, right? Like,
sure. Fair enough. From things I saw in news articles at the time, people complaining about the name, but those names have become iconic. And yes, the Wii was not a success, but like Nintendo names are super iconic. And here's the thing. Most reports and rumors have suggested that this is just going to be a new iteration of the Switch.
Sure.
Nothing game changing. And while that might certainly be true, I'm still in the park, and I know I'm in a very small minority. I'm in the park of, I feel like there's still going to be something unique outside of power that separates the Nintendo Switch from the Switch 2. I think there's not necessarily a huge gimmick, but I feel like there's going to be something that separates the two, something that you can do on the Switch 2 that you couldn't do on the Switch. That's not just run higher fidelity video games. And I joked on Prime's podcast when I had to leave early a few weeks back that I had an inside source. It's 2 screens and the actual name is going to be called the Nintendo Flip. But again, that was a joke, but I think it's catchy. I think it fits with like the sound effect idea. I know a lot of people might not like that name, but I'm just trying to think of like outside of the box to where Nintendo usually comes from.
Okay, but I did ask you to give me an example of a name that you think would work. Because I'm waiting to tear it down.
Sure.
I want you to give me a name so I can tear it down. I'm setting it up. I'm trying to attack you here very nicely, but not so nicely. Give me a name.
I wish I would have.
Come on.
Oh my god. I wish I would have. I wish I would have prepared some names for this debate. I'm trying to think.
All right, you know what? I'm not. It's okay. You brought up Super Switch.
Sure.
I think Super Switch would be a bad idea.
Sure.
Why? So, I recognize that once upon a time, that's literally how Nintendo handled, suggesting a next generation console. The Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. That was their first sequel, Super. Mm-hmm. And it made sense because it also went in line with Super Mario. I get it. For that time, it kind of made sense. But also, sales went down significantly. But man, we don't have to blame just the name for that. But it isn't like the Super Nintendo was like massively more successful than the NES. It was far less successful than the NES. They lost a lot of market share in that next generation. So I wouldn't say that Super was necessarily the best idea. It was cool for the time, for sure. But that was also the 90s. 90s is a very different time, right? If they were to call it the Super Switch, I don't think it would roll the same way. But here's another issue. You call it Super Switch. What do you do after? The Super Duper Switch?
Well, we don't know. We don't
Switch
know. 2? I mean, it's a fair point, but here's the thing. We don't know. I mean, Nintendo went from the Super Nintendo to the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 is an iteration of the Super Nintendo. It's a more powerful cartridge-based console that added 2 more controllers. It is iterative. They've done a lot lot of iterative stuff. So we really changed stuff up, obviously, by adding motion controls and changing the way we think of how video games are played. Obviously, the DS.
Well, let me counter you a little bit.
Sure.
But I mean, I think from that perspective, you could argue every system's iterative, because I
Sure.
think you could argue the N64 is more different than the Super Nintendo than the Wii is to the GameCube. Think about it.
Well, I mean,
Literally, the dimensions were changed for gaming.
It depends on how you look.
Forever.
It depends on how you look at it. But the Wii, like, I mean, the big difference is, you know, the Wii completely changed the way you interact with the video game, you know, with the infrared and the sensor bar, motion controls, the pointer and stuff like that. But
Codename Revolution would have been a hell of a name.
Yeah,
that was the initial code name.
Great name.
When they announced it, the trailers had Revolution on the system too. Like, it was initially called Nintendo Revolution.
Right.
It used to look, it used to seem badass, and then it became Nintendo Wii. Like, it was such a 180.
And like from my understanding, and here's another thing with like the Wii U, where it's kind of an anomaly in my opinion. A lot of like their weird, quirky naming conventions have really suited the consoles. The DS, obviously dual screen, 3DS, dual screen with the 3D mechanics. The Wii, that one's a little bit weird, but you know, they would use like we want to play, we want to, so like bringing people together. It was a console that aimed at bringing non-gamers and gamers together playing. The GameCube was an actual GameCube, the switches. So the Wii U, the U part is very bizarre. Like, it was just
10 minutes.
It was a bad naming convention. So I don't think it's there. And I think like the major point is that Nintendo's just an extremely non-conventional company. They make extremely non-conventional decisions. And yes, there is new leadership, but they have a history of going, well, even though this is what people think, or this is what traditionally sells, or I mean, even the thought of being an iterative next-gen console goes against the blue ocean strategy. So I understand like things are kind of out the window right now with the new president, but I just think they're a very unconventional company, and it's really hard for me to picture Switch 2, then Switch 3, then Switch 4.
Sure.
And then we're in that Sony pattern. I feel like Nintendo brings the party to gaming. They bring the fun to gaming. They bring the weird colors, the weird gizmos, the weird gadgets. Doesn't always work, but when it does, you get a Switch and you get a Wii, the two big unique ones and you get the DS, their biggest selling consoles of all time, that each kind of, you know, are quirky in their own right.
Yeah. So first off, I get where you're coming from. I like quirky Nintendo. So let's not, I don't want it to be confused. I like quirky Nintendo. But I think being quirky for the sake of being quirky, I think that's bad. Like, right. I don't think you should just do random stuff just to do random stuff. I think there needs to be purpose behind it.
Sure. And this is why, real quick, not to interrupt you, I want to give you back your time. This is why I mentioned that I know I'm in the minority, but I do think there's going to be something unique about this system that the other doesn't do. And maybe the new naming convention could tie into that.
Yeah, like I think there needs to be purpose behind it, right?
Sure.
I mean, and there are some names that have been thrown around, right? We had that YouTube survey that said Nintendo Switch Attach, right? Sure. And then with the recent reports that, you know, seem to hold some levels of validity, there's been talk of that magnetic Joy-Cons that attach to the console. So that kind of, you know, there seems to be some fuel to that fire that's being added there. I don't know if that's enough of a gimmick that the controllers attach to call the whole system attach, but there's something there. I kind of feel like that would be a little bit of a mistake, unless there's something more pivotal with, like, there needs to be like something more significant to the console relating to attach for that to make sense as a name, in my opinion.
I hate that name too, by the way. Just want to throw that out there.
Sure.
I do not think that's clever or.
But it kind of goes to my point though, where like we can debate about what name works and what name doesn't, because if they're still following the Switch formula and they want people to understand it's a Switch but an evolution, what do you add to the name beyond the number that's clear cut? Here's another example. So today, we have the whole new Pyoro tweet, right, with the Nintendo World Championships cartridge, and some people are starting to think that maybe this is a hint towards Switch 2 because it has switches. It might be, we'll see, but on that cartridge, there's a part where it says plus, like in big caps. And some people are starting to think that maybe he's hinting that the next system, the Switch 2, is going to be called Switch Plus. Now, years ago, I theorized that Nintendo would announce a revision for the Switch that would be more portable and cheaper. The Switch Lite, I was right. It was called Switch Lite. But I also theorized that there would be a Pro model that would be called Switch Plus. I thought it made sense back then. I was obviously wrong about the Plus, right? But I thought it made sense back then because Plus indicates, an enhanced a little bit more. But it does not. It doesn't suggest next generation. So if that ends up being the name, I also think that would be a mistake. But if you call it Switch 2, yeah, maybe it's lacking in the personality from the name alone, but everyone's going to understand what it is. And the personality, I think it should come in the places that matter, in the evolutions of the console. Where if they decide to add some cool, quirky new features, if they give us a better version of Miiverse, right? In the actual games themselves, give us more personality in that. So I'm all about Nintendo staying quirky, having innovation, but doing it in the right ways. Giving us a weird, wacky name just for the sake of being different, I don't think that's smart. I think it's dumb.
Sure. And you make some really good points, Andres. And part of me feels like Nintendo in the Switch years has lost a little bit of the fun and quirkiness that it had in previous generations. And I know some of it is for tech reasons, but we lost.
You got 5 minutes.
Perfect. We got music. We don't have music in the eShop anymore. We don't have as many like goofy and dramatic, or not goofy, sorry, fun and dramatic color options for like Pro controllers or consoles like we used to have. Yes, they do the Joy-Cons, but like
even the Joy-Cons are kind of wacky though. Like if you think about it, they gave us a neon blue and a neon red, almost orange, like Joy-Cons. Like
yes,
they also had the basic gray though. And
yes, I would have loved to see them like kind of go down the 64 era of like all the atomic colors. Like the Pro controllers, they change the color on the grips most of the time, maybe a little design on the face of the controller, but generally it's just the grips. And I would love a Nintendo full colored one that's actually like first party Pro controller.
This kind of reminds me of what Sony's done this gen with the PS5. Like the PS, like people were kind of complaining about the PS5 at first. It was like such a weird design.
Sure.
We were like, why did you do this? Why did you just do something more sleek and like minimalist? But they added personality to the console.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against personality. I'm all for it, but it just needs to be done in ways that make sense.
Right. So the point that I wanted to make was like I feel like we've lost a lot of that. We get less of like the fun colors and stuff. We don't have the music in the eShop. We don't have the Miiverse anymore. You brought up something so freaking cool. I wish I had thought of it in a prior podcast that I was with you about the possibility of Street Pass. Like these are all things that make Nintendo consoles so fun and unique and so much different than what everyone else is doing. And I feel like we've lost a lot of that. So I feel like then pulling out, like, again, assuming that I'm correct and there's going to be some unique feature that separates this one outside of magnet clicking Pro-Cons or Joy-Cons or whatever they call it. Some unique feature. The Switch 2 can do this, but the other one can't. I think naming it something unique but with purpose makes a lot of sense. And I don't like attach. It's two syllables. Switch is nice. It rolls off the tongue. It's one syllable. The Wii, it's super easy. Attach is just, I don't know. I don't like it. It's bad.
From that perspective, Switch Plus is better, I guess, because it rolls a bit more. And
they could do a cool logo with it. They could make a chromatic, like this cool chromatic plus symbol with lightning, or I don't know, colored lightning around it. Showing off like the magnet technology. Maybe that magnet technology is applied to more than just the Joy-Cons. I have no idea.
Yeah, maybe the Plus will somehow use that to like advertise magnetism. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe. Yeah. But again, that's just another theory, right? We don't know. And I don't think Plus is great either. Like you haven't told me a name I think would be a good name to evoke next generation.
But here's the thing. I understand that. I don't have the names. I didn't prepare the names. But I'll tell you what, even if I had a list of names, it's probably, if it's not called the Switch 2, I'd probably never guess in a million years what Nintendo would think to call their console, because Nintendo's the company that thinks of the things that no one else thinks of. They're on a different level when it comes to imagination. You know, they're like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, where it's just like, you have no idea what's around the next corner when it comes to them. So it's hard for me to even guess. But I will say this: I just thought about this when talking about the magnets. Anyone realize that the OG Switch may have actually teased magnetic Joy-Cons because there's a plus and minus symbol on it?
There
That's
were also
wild.
patents as well. Like it's no secret the Nintendo's thought about it.
Sure. But yeah, I don't have the names, but
and so we're clear. I'm not saying that the name will be Switch 2. I'm just saying I think it should be Switch 2, because I think that would be the best way to market next generation console.
Switch might not even be in the name. I'm like dropping things like, you know, I said the Super Nintendo Switch, the Switch Evolution.
Would be really dumb if they cut out Switch entirely.
You never know, because they might look at it like Wii U. We shouldn't recycle the same. Who knows how they're looking at the different aspects of the failure, but they might look at it. They just
call it the Nintendo.
Yeah.
That might be better, just because
actually,
you know, like everyone should know that a Switch is a Nintendo, right?
Yeah.
But then 5 or 6 years from now, we'll have another argument. They should call it the Nintendo 11 or something.
Just bring back the Revolution. Everyone loved that name.
Yeah, it was a cool name back then, but I was a teenager back then.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the timer.
That's it.
So any final thoughts, buddy?
Final thoughts is I'm really excited to revisit this after we get a name reveal.
I hope we get a name reveal in like 4 days.
Right?
I hope. But probably not. I don't know.
I want to say I think you are completely wrong. You're a fool. No one should listen to you.
Why didn't you do this when the timer was on?
No, I know. I'm too late. I'm too laid back. I tried to get a little bit into it, but
I thought we had a good discussion.
Yeah, I think we had a good discussion. But maybe another topic.
Were we heated enough, everyone? Let us know in the comments below, for sure. But anyways, guys, that's our talk. We'll see what Nintendo names the next console. Whatever they name it, that doesn't mean it's the right choice. It just means it's the choice they made. So we shall see. But we'll see you soon. Take care.